So we are Team 2. I'm Isaac Silky.
I'm Nick Garcia.
I'm Bailey Davenport.
And I'm Devin Pollard.
And we will be looking at how gender affects the interaction with videos. And so the main problem that we're wanting to address is that there have been several studies already looking at this idea. However, most of these studies have done so through two different means. They've done so through counting viewership, or they've done so through likelihood or likeness of a genre. However, we feel that this does not actually fully answer the question of how well the different genders interact with different genre types. And so these are the different studies that we've done, that we've looked at to determine how we should go about with this study. So the first study is by Frontiers In. And so in their case, it looked mostly at the genres of movies, and the second one looked at the genres of TV. So these two had a very, very similar outcome. Men generally preferred the vast majority of the different genres. Comedy was essentially even between the two. I believe women preferred it more in one, and men preferred it more in the other. And then women generally preferred drama and romance. And so we did go ahead and we included preference of genre in our study as well, just to see how well we matched up with these two studies, which Bailey will cover in the results. And for the third study that we looked at, it's more of a data showcase rather than a study. It showcases percentage of each gender on YouTube. And so for this, we just use this to showcase that there is, in fact, an almost even split between the two genders on YouTube. Women do make up a slight majority of the number. However, as percentage of female versus percentage of men on YouTube, as in percentage of men out of the total amount of men and percentage of women out of the total number of women, those two numbers are approximately the same at 67% for women and 68% for men, which after factoring in the slightly higher population of women means there are more women on YouTube, however, by a small margin. And then our fourth study that we looked at is actually one of the main reasons for our study being in the direction that it is, because it showcases that while there is that almost even number of viewership between the two genders, men make up a vastly higher amount of watch hours instead. And they also watch the vast majority of genres more so, although in this case it'd be categories. And instead of having roughly 17 or so different genres, there's instead almost 50 categories on YouTube, which again, almost 90% of them are vastly overwatched by men in comparison to women. And so this is the survey that we went ahead and did. Go ahead and pull that up. And I'll let Bailey talk you through this since she's the one who made it.
Yeah, so here is our survey. Just want to run through the questions real quick. So we start with the obvious question, what is your gender? We went with gender identity, so included prefer not to say and other. We were trying to focus on masculine and feminine examples or like expression of these particular genres. So any non-binary responses, we didn't include that data. Further, then we see, please select 3 genres of YouTube video. These are a collection of the top 20 most commonly viewed or most common genres on YouTube, according to BuzzFeed. So it was just kind of a starting place. So there are 20 options there, and they got to pick their top 3. Then moving on, the next 3 questions are a scale of 1 to 7. How likely are you to comment on a YouTube video? Never comment, always comment. How likely are you to subscribe to a YouTube channel? Never subscribing to always subscribing. How frequently do you share a YouTube video with a friend or family member, from always to never? And then finally, like Isaac mentioned, we're really interested in like how much of the YouTube video people tend to watch. So we also included a multiple choice where they had to decide what percentage on average of a YouTube video they would finish watching it by increments of 10. So that's the survey we sent out. We got over 107 responses. And before we move on to the results, because, you know, every time you do an experiment, what's one of the first things we're taught in elementary school is when you do a science experiment, you have a hypothesis. So what did you guys expect to come out of this survey?
So I'll let Nick start.
Thanks, man. Personally, I kind of expected a lot more, what's the word? Activity, I guess, out of male participants on YouTube than on females. Not necessarily as far as subscriptions go, but especially for like comments and stuff like that. That's just kind of from what I've seen, like in general, just kind of the stigma is that girls on the internet a lot less. And so that's kind of what I expected. But as far as the subscribing and the sharing goes, I honestly expected there to not be much of a difference between the two. Yeah, that's what I expected.
And so I expected there to be a difference in the comments. I wasn't sure what the difference would be, as that's not something that I ever really pay attention to even know either way. Sharing, liking, I figure would be roughly the same. And then I figured there'd be a somewhat noticeable difference in watch time. That's what I expected.
Why is that, if you don't mind me asking?
Because of the studies that I looked at, one of them showcased that there's approximately 44% difference in the amount of videos that men will watch in comparison to women. And so I figure there should be something like a 25 to 50% difference. However, that's obviously far too broad of a range.
That's interesting, though. What about you, Devin?
If y'all can hear me all right.
Far so good.
I expected the males, to comment a lot more than the women. As far as subscriptions and liking and sharing, I really expected it to be about even. And watch time, I guess I just thought you guys would have more watch time also. So about pretty much what Isaac said, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Same for you, Bailey, or different?
I don't know. I think I definitely, for whatever reason, also expected guys to comment more. I wondered about subscription, but also I don't know a whole lot of people who I don't know. I feel like I didn't know how to I didn't know that would necessarily have a gender difference. I feel like it would be kind of even across the board. Sharing, I think, would also be pretty even across the board. I was really interested in the different genres. I mean, there are obvious ones that, based on stereotypes, we would all kind of assume, one of the genres was beauty. We would all assume that there would be more of a female or feministic. That's not the word for it.
Feminine bias.
Feminine, thank you. More of a feminine number for that. And we could stereotypically assume that there would be more of a masculine response for sports, those kind of things. But I was really interested about kind of some of the more, I guess you could say, neutral ones, like Motivational speakers or TED Talks, like those, like that's not necessarily like a gendered thing, stereotypically. So a lot of it, I kind of didn't know what to expect. I was ready to be surprised, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, let's dive into the results.
Awesome.
So first we have commenting. We had about twice as many females respond as males to our survey. So everything is done in a percentage to make it easier to compare. But we also want to like be completely upfront that you know, there was more of a larger collection for females, so it's going to make the data a little bit different.
Just out of
So I see,
curiosity, were there also
yeah.
like a larger percentage of females in like the populations that you sent this out to, or was it kind of 50-50 still?
It was split pretty evenly.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, if anything, there's probably more males in one of the groups that I sent it out to.
So that could be a video upon itself, you know?
Right?
It's more likely to respond to surveys randomly sent to them in group chats.
Yeah.
Apparently not
I
men.
wonder what that would, like, what the cause of that would be.
Yeah. Anyway,
So,
I'm curious.
as we see, it appears that the male would be, that according to the survey, men are less likely to comment on a YouTube video. What do you guys think about that? No, wait. Okay, I'm sorry. I said that backwards. So the blue represents the answer that they would never comment.
Mm-hmm.
They were most likely to never comment. So it would actually be, it would look like then in that case, guys are a lot more likely to comment on a video. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think these are definitely interesting, especially because there is essentially no percentage of men willing to who's even in the top 4 responses. How do I word it? Okay, so the male responses only answered in the bottom 3. However, with females, even though they did drastically more in the bottom, they still actually had be approximately 2 or 3 responses actually in a higher grouping. So that's very interesting. That shows that there would be a higher amount of derivation between I cannot say the word. There's a higher amount of diversity between the women's likelihood of commenting than there is men's, though the median is drastically higher.
Yeah, that's really interesting too for me. And to be honest, I really can't think of a reason why.
Yeah, I've been trying to think through like based on what we know about masculinity, femininity, and the mind, like what could be causing this? Because it seemed like according to the numbers, the people who identify as female are 20% more of them say I would never comment on a video. Do you guys have any speculations about that?
So one of the things that Nick kind of brought up, although we weren't able to find a particular study to showcase this, but this is something that we both kind of seen, is that harassment towards women on online platforms tends to be a little bit more severe than it is towards men, and so that higher percentage of women might have a bit more reluctance to comment in order to avoid said harassment, whereas as an overall, they might be more prone to extroverted activities such as commenting on a video, and so that could explain that 4% or so.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Any other thoughts, or are you guys ready to move on to our next?
Let's keep going.
Let's do it. So these are representing the likelihood of subscribing to a YouTube channel. That medium blue is the least likely. all the way up to the darkest blue that it only shows up on the female pie chart as being most likely, like would always subscribe. You can see there on the side the in-betweens. What do you guys make of this?
Yeah, so this is fairly interesting, not because there is a statistical difference necessarily, as these are all small enough differences that they could largely just be put to our sample size. However, it's interesting how similar they are, even though they look relatively different. As far as I can see, the largest difference between them is an 11% difference in one of the middle groupings, which could easily be explained by a slight preference of positivity in one group, maybe, and a slight pessimism in the other group. One of them saying somewhat likely, one of them saying somewhat unlikely, even if they might share that same overall actual percentage.
Mm-hmm.
That was all I had.
I'm just trying to think.
This one really stumped me.
Yeah,
Not gonna lie.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's obviously a difference, but all the differences are small enough that it's hard to explain exactly what that difference might have been caused by without going into further studies into this particularly.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, like I don't know. I know I said earlier that I expected this to be pretty even in my hypothesis, but when it came out even, I was surprised.
Yeah,
Because I don't know, going into it, I was thinking about how oftentimes, especially like we've seen a lot of studies this semester where femininity and the mind kind of go hand in hand with concepts like nurturing and community, like with preferences for nurturing or community. So I would almost expect like women to have higher rates of subscriptions, because a subscription is like, oh yes, like I've made a commitment to this channel, you know, I want to hear every time something else comes out. And so you would think like for something that we've been reading a lot having to do with nurturing and community might show up here, but it doesn't really appear to be that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this could almost add on to an additional study as well of counting or tracking the number of subscriptions instead, or in addition to like likelihood of subscribing to a channel. That makes sense.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. On to the next one.
Let's do it.
Sharing.
So just like the others, this is the likelihood of, and this one is sharing a YouTube video with a friend or family member. The numbers and colors are about the same as they were on the last two, so the color code should be the same. What do you guys think?
Yeah. Again, this is fairly similar to the commenting, or not commenting. Subscription graph, which is again it's interesting how there's small differences between the different things. And again, I think it also would have been interesting if we went and maybe limited the rating scale to something like 1 through 5 or 1 through 3, just to see how that would affect it. If that would cause some people who maybe thought they were neutral or thought they were somewhat agreed to move to neutral, or to move to that other side of like agreeing that they would in fact share or not share.
Also, I think this makes sense. Like in our culture, our society, like, you know, sharing things has become so popular, like especially over technology, like from like airdropping between iPhones and you know, like sending TikToks back and forth, like, or GIFs, you know, like,
yeah,
or GIFs. I don't really know how to pronounce that word. I never have.
I don't think anybody does.
Wonderful.
Like,
at least I'm not alone, right?
So that one's interesting because it's technically it's supposed to be said GIF with a hard G. However, the person who coined the term pronounces it GIF.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So really, anything's right.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I feel like this could be pretty well expected in our culture.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know. You look at social, like we are the social media culture right now. So I think it makes sense. You know, some people buy into it, and some people are like, no, I'm fine. So I don't know that I'm too surprised by this one.
I find it interesting because 7 pretty much means you always share video, right?
Yes.
I find it kind of interesting how many people say that they would always share a video that they see. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree.
It wasn't specified in the. Go away, please. In this, I recall, it just says, y'all can see this, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it just says how frequently do you share? 7 being never, 1 being always. Okay, well, that's kind of backwards.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
It's fine.
Okay, well, that makes a little more sense. But, okay, that actually answers my question.
Well, no, it still does raise the question of there are people who apparently always share a video,
Yeah, that's
which
true.
even if that is a small percentage, that's still an interesting mindset that I, as one of the people who doesn't share anything, do not understand at all.
Yeah, me neither.
Okay.
Well, on to the next one.
Sounds good. This one's really fascinating. First of all, I am in disbelief that there are 3% of anybody who would only watch 20% of a video on average.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, as it looks like the smallest percentage watched by females is essentially the at least 50%.
Mm-hmm.
Although it is somewhat hard. It looks like there was likely 1 or 2 responses that were lower. However, again, those could just be chalked up to basically statistical anomalies. The other one, the 3%, that's somewhat interesting. But then it does make that jump to 60%,
Right.
which 60% that could be roughly explained away as due to the limited number of people. As that's again small sample size.
So it almost seems like men have a tendency to watch less of their YouTube videos or just videos in general than women, which is really interesting.
Well, but then there's also at the 100% and 90% scale where men appear to have the larger overall. However, once it jumps down to 80%, then it looks like women actually do take it, if I'm doing the math for that correctly, or at the very least, it's and so for my hypothesis, I hypothesized that men would in fact have a relatively higher U percentage, and so while that does match up with the 100%, and 90% and 80%, they actually apparently watch less, and so that doesn't quite match up with what some of the studies that I read would have seemed to have shown. And so again, this could just be our particular sample size or our particular pool that we pulled from. But again, it's interesting how close this one was in particular.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like, especially with those studies, we were expecting more of a difference there.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone got anything else to add? Nope. All
This
right.
one's my all-time favorite. I'm so
Same.
pumped about this one. So this, these are the most popular YouTube video genres by gender. Wow. Any thoughts? Like there's so much to unpack here.
Mhm.
Any thoughts right off the bat?
Well, we were all talking about it before we started this video. But I think the fact that, according to this data, none of the men watch health or fitness videos, which actually is kind of mind blowing. and I have no clue why. I don't know about y'all.
Yeah, I'm the only thing I can possibly think of would be if health and fitness is more on the side of like watching a video, like a workout video, and when offered between like you know, you have to pick, would you pick sports or your own like workout video, they're gonna pick sports. Like that's the only thing I can think of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, because it's as someone who has watched different fitness videos, although not well, I wouldn't call them fitness videos, I guess, because it's not like getting skinny or anything like that. But I mean, that might be the thing, is that it might be that difference in connotation or denotation of the words and how our sample, our pool ended up, what's the word, understood it, where they might have understood it as the health and fitness as what you were describing, as something maybe more like to watch someone working out and then you can follow along, rather than seeing it as something where it's say the blog of the world's strongest man, Brian Shaw.
Yeah. Hey, Nick, is there any way you can like zoom in on this slide so we can
Absolutely.
see?
Oh,
Oh no.
I think
okay.
you can just scroll down maybe.
There, come on. Ah, there
There
we
you
go.
go.
Woo. Round of applause, please. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I do it for the fans.
One thing I think is really interesting, from the female respondents, there's only one category here that we had no female response. But there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 categories from which we get no male response. I think that's really interesting. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, and so I mean, looking at it, a few of those look like they could be somewhat grouped together, such as fashion and beauty influencer, and then with this connotation that we've kind of established, or that we believe that the people who took the survey might have established, health and fitness almost go together. But then that still leaves lifestyle, which shouldn't really fit with that. Pranks and challenges, which shows that we got enough responses that that's not necessarily a just an anomaly out there. And then also the inclusion of family. That all together, that's fairly interesting.
Obviously, I can't really speak for females, but I know if I were hanging out with some of my friends and then I was watching a video on beauty or on fashion or something, I would not hear the end of it for months. And so I feel like that could almost kind of factor into the lack of men watching, videos like that.
Right.
What do you, or is there anything like that with girls, Bailey?
I
Anything
don't know.
taboo?
See, and I was just thinking about like, the quote unquote masculine genres here would probably be, sports, gaming stereotypically would be, um, potentially, I would think like the pranks and challenges could potentially be considered more masculine depending on who you're talking to.
Yeah, I'm very surprised with pranks and challenges that there were no male responses at all.
Yeah, that's really interesting. But I don't know. I feel like there's almost like a stigma of if you are a girl and you like sports or you like gaming, like, oh, that's really cool. Almost like it's more acceptable for a female to have those quote unquote masculine preferences. But if, like you said, if one of you guys like were watching a beauty or fashion video, like there'd be a strongly negative connotation to that.
Yeah.
Also, I'm really sad to see that technology is the lone, the one that the girls didn't come through at all.
Yeah, especially
Why?
with how high the response rate was for technology by the males, and just the overall number of females. I'm surprised that, because it was the only one that had no responses, and it's
Yeah.
so I'm actually in a technology major, MIS, and so there's roughly 50 students in the class, and only 2 of them are female. So yeah, it's a weird statistic to see how few women are actually in technology fields, even though they're starting to increase in engineering to some extent.
Yeah. I think the only other one that really surprised me a lot was learning, like generally just educational videos. I can't really think of anything we've learned about in class or read about why this would show up as more masculine preferred.
Yeah, I
You guys
couldn't
have any
either.
thoughts?
Especially because as a whole, it seems kind of like um, educational environments are kind of more like I've had significantly more female teachers than I have had male teachers, you know?
Yeah,
And so I kind of expect that to be reflected in the learning genre of YouTube. You know what I mean?
yeah. Well, that and studies are showing that women are enrolling, or there are more women enrolling in college than men at this point. So that's really fascinating.
Yeah. So
Maybe
the
that's
only
why
thing,
the men need to watch videos to learn.
yeah, I would say the only thing I can think of is it's either one, due to the particular pools that we pulled from, where there might be a skew in that, which again that
Mm,
that amount of difference kind of makes me think otherwise. And then also the exact nature of uh, watching a video on learning, for instance, where it's like, for instance, gaming. Uh, Even there's a massive skew in favor of males for gaming. However, while there's still a skew in males for like percentage of people who play video games, it's not that big. It's much closer to 50-50. That, however, is something like 80%, 20%, give or take. So I think that it might be that while females might be more inclined to uh, desiring something like a higher education and learning, they may not see watching these videos as the way to do that. They might see it as maybe counterproductive. Like for instance,
yeah.
I know most learning videos that I can think of are somewhat unnecessary. They're like number file. Number file isn't going to ever play any part in my life. It's just interesting natures of mathematics that I like to watch. So it's very interesting.
Also, I just realized the number 2 female is uh female genre is beauty. I'm a little, and then number 3 is cooking. So that's interesting.
Hey, but
I guess
there's some
some
good cooking videos
stereotypes.
on YouTube.
This
Oh
is
yeah.
true.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I have to like have food with me while I'm watching cooking videos, because if not,
Well, then I just get depressed because I watch Gordon Ramsay cook a steak or something, and I'm just eating like Chip Ahoy.
Gordon Ramsay, Guga Foods, BA Test Kitchen. Oof. Okay.
that was a lot of that was a lot of fun to get those results in.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. All right. Anything left to say?
So addressing the problem would be the thing. And so for this, I mean, we did kind of discuss this as well as the alternative explanations quite a bit. And so the main problem
Mm-hmm.
with this was that we didn't have enough people in our survey. I actually did the math out, and we'd need at least 300 people to get a 95% certainty. That's even with a 5% margin of error, which is not really good. And then to get it to 99%, I believe it's 900 something people. And then to get it to a 95% with 1% margin of error would take 1,600 people. And then to get 99% with 1% margin of error would take like 16,000 people, give or take. And so that's just not something that's numbers that we could achieve with this study. And other than that is we still did have a skew in that we used a survey. if we'd gone and we'd instead directly gotten this user information through YouTube, that would have been a little bit more viable to do it, because that would have theoretically removed the skew. However, in turn, that introduces the financial issues of it, as to get that 99% certainty with a 1% margin of error, for instance, that's 16,000 respondents at, I believe it was roughly 35% or 35 cents per rough online user data. And that's, excuse me, and that's Facebook user data. And I would assume that YouTube user information would likely be somewhat more valuable, as it showcases things like you like to watch, which could directly move over onto movies and TVs and whatnot. And so with that, after calculating all that, it would be roughly $5,000 in expense to get all that user information on the low end. On the high end, it could be up to $8,000 or $10,000, and even that is somewhat low if you only want to get a 99% certainty, as that's still only like, that's not even 2 sigma yet, I believe, on statistics, which isn't great. So again, it's the never-ending argument of limited resources, but very much needed currency.
And then as far as different explanations for, why our data could be not accurate, as Isaac just covered, our sample size really wasn't that big. Again, there wasn't a ton that we could have done about that, unfortunately. But another one is that our data came from a pretty small number of populations, and then even within that, all of the people that we sent it to were pretty much college students. So that's a really small population in itself of the people who actually watch YouTube. So, while for us, the woman had like a ton of beauty and cooking and other stuff, but maybe for 13-year-olds watching YouTube, it would be different, obviously, than a 20-year-old. Yeah.
And with that, I think we're done.